Roger. Hello, Roger Corman. Hello, Julie. Hello, Julie Corman. Thank you for coming on the Last Drive-In Show. Your movies are the best, and everybody knows. We love you. We love you. Come on, we love you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson, here as part of the From the Q YouTube channel. Tonight, we are going to be doing something very special, as we are going to be honoring the late Roger Corman, who recently passed away at the age of 98. We will be taking a look at two of his movies. Boy, oh boy, are these two significant ones. For many different reasons, we will be looking at the 1962 movie, The Intruder, and we will be discussing 1990, Roger Corman, if you can believe it, his very last movie. After being away for 15 years, he stepped in to direct an $11.5 million budgeted movie, and it bombed really badly, Frankenstein Unbound. First, we are going to discuss The Intruder. My co-host, of course, is Brian. You can find all of our social media links. You can find everything in the YouTube description below or in the podcast write-up. Please leave a 4 or 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. I am going to put a content warning because The Intruder certainly goes very hard in terms of its language, in terms of its content. So I just want to put a little bit of a warning that we are going to be getting into some very sensitive territory in terms of language, in terms of behavior. So just be aware of that we are going to be talking about some legitimate Black trauma here. I'm going to avoid using certain words as much as possible, but I feel the need to specify one word in particular. Like if I say the N word, I don't need to say that word, but the C word can have multiple meanings. There is a lot of the use of the colloquial term coon. When I say the C word, that is the only time I will use that C word. I will otherwise refer to it as the C word because I'm not going to use that word very often. And Brian, I don't know about you, but I mean, even just saying the word, it felt like the first time I was watching the movie and this old lady just casually drops the N word, and I was like, okay, we're going places. I don't know where we're going. And boy, oh boy, does this movie goes hard.
Boy, does it. And I kind of, God, I can't believe I made this joke, but I already made the joke right off the bat and texted Jerome like, oh, are we watching a Quentin Tarantino script movie right here? Like, did Quentin Tarantino write this script? Is Samuel L. Jackson looking in the background? Yeah, that's where this kind of movie goes. And it's for a purpose. It's not to, I don't think insult at all. I think it's actually to shine a light on people in the South that at the time were obviously having these crazy conflicted views on integration and racial integration in schools. Just crazy stuff. And I am sure people still to this day are against it, but c'est la vie. So, yeah, just a crazy concept. Not so crazy now, I think, but I mean, yeah, for 1962, very controversial for sure. But the vibe I was getting strangely was like, this feels like a Twilight Zone type episode. And if you look at the writing credits for the writer of this movie, he wrote a bunch of Twilight Zone episodes. So if that's why I kind of got that vibe, and I was like, something about this. So I looked it up and I was right. Like the writer wrote a bunch of episodes. So yeah, it's got that vibe to it, where you learn about like social injustices through the veil of someone else's viewpoint, so to speak, and kind of this movie's through the eyes of the racist son of a bitch that William Shatner portrays in this movie. But it's for a point, and by the end of the movie, everyone kind of leaves him and turns against him. But still, like, it's very, very relevant to this day because it feels like this dude would have probably had a podcast and a cult following and was probably going to be there on January 6th.
There is no doubt. And we are talking, of course, about a William Shatner before Star Trek, probably around the time he was doing his very famous episode of The Twilight Zone. And I agree, this very much feels like, let's just take the gloves off and we're going to do a very Twilight Zone-like tale. It doesn't really have a supernatural connection, so I think that is something that distinguishes it. But I think what makes this movie so special is the fact that it really does go to some places that I'm not sure even movies in 2024 would go. And I think it's really important to note that this movie does portray behaviors. It uses language that I don't think it is endorsing. It is absolutely putting forth what's happening in this movie as an example of just the dark tendencies that so many individuals in this country have. And you could certainly make this movie now, and I don't know how different it would be. This movie not only feels ahead of its time in 1962, but in so many ways it feels ahead of its time and relevance in 2024. And quite honestly, this is a movie that I did not know that was going to go that hard, but I think that what it is able to do is you put Shatner in a position where he can put all of his kind of overacting tendencies to work. And I just think that his performance is singular. It is the thing that makes this movie work. And look, I think there are a lot of ways. There's a lot of times when I don't think William Shatner's acting would benefit a script. You look at some of the more subtle movies of the 1970s, and you can see why Shatner struggled during that time period. But you look at a movie like this, you need somebody who is almost over the top. You need somebody who you can buy as being this over the top. Like he's mysteriously in rooms when he shouldn't be, things of that nature. And I mean, the thing about it is that you don't see, you did see Shatner play kind of a villain, like the evil Kirk a couple times with the goatee, and like he definitely has that ability, but I don't know that you necessarily saw him go in this direction where he's not flat out using racist language constantly. And I mean, it's shocking to hear him use the N word as much as he does, because I think we're all used to William Shatner just being Captain Kirk, and he's not Captain Kirk in this movie. And I think what I also want to point out is that while Shatner deserves a ton of credit for what he did as an actor, you've got to give credit to Roger Corman as the director for centering Shatner as Adam Kramer and just doing a marvelous job of shooting this movie. It's great set design. You get a real sense of the geography of the town. You also get some great casting. I don't know that the acting is always perfect, but the thing I think would kind of counteracts the fact of some of the acting maybe not being as good as it is that it feels authentic and the characters feel lived in and real. And I think that makes a huge difference as well. And it's also easy to see why a movie like this would not make any money. Like, this is a movie that has to be very difficult for everybody to watch. I mean, you're talking about the virulent racism of the South, but there is a very interesting critique of even the more liberal members of the city. Frank Maxwell as Tom McDaniel, like he is very much portrayed as kind of a hero, but even as a hero, like he's not really a good guy. Like he's still pretty racist, and he's still not the best human being in the world. But in this town of just bloodthirsty, like they're ready to almost lynch somebody at the end of this movie. Like he very much stands out, and the principal character as well also stands out. And I just think that this movie is able to do some things that a lot of other movies just, I mean, you just don't see this in 1962. You look at, some of the movies of the 1960s, and it's a lot of musicals, it's a lot of, light fare, and then you've got something like this, and I can't imagine movie audiences going out there and watching something like this and absorbing it in a really healthy manner. Because, like I said, this is a movie that dares to go places that so few have.
Yeah, you're talking in the likes of like an American History X, which I compared it to, obviously, in terms of the vulgar language and the realities of the language and the use of it, and just some of the things that were just strikingly similar to scenes from American History X, where it's kind of like, the racism starts at home, where you get that early scene with the family that William Shatner's trying to, I guess, kind of like, corrupt the daughter. But you see that family dinner, and it's just kind of the same thing as the same scene in American History X. And the father figures, the grandpa and the father, kind of have these racist views that really influence the younger generation's thinking, and that's how it kind of snowballs pretty much. Is this generationalized thinking of racism, and we've seen it over the generations and history, like throughout history. So, very, very on point, very timely, and it's still like one of those things that still happens today. Um, it's unfortunate, but it's kind of one of these, people are going to have these, biases and these racist tendencies, and they're going to spread it to their kids, whether they know it or not, or they try to know, where they try to stop themselves, or, you know, their influence is going to really influence their kids. And that really showed it in the beginning of this movie. And I thought that's a really smart scene. And for Roger Corman to kind of pull this off, I mean, if you look at the background of this production, 3-week shoot on set in Missouri, maybe like 4 principal actors. The rest were pretty much, people from the town. That's that very guerrilla independent style of filmmaking that Roger Corman's all about. So I wanted to point that out as well, because he's very much known for that style. Like if you were a young filmmaker, up and coming filmmaker at the time, you'd want to join one of his crews on the set, kind of fly kind of training, and boom, it's like instant film school, right at guerrilla film school right there, and you learn from one of the masters. And in this case, like, it was a perfect way to do it, because Jerome sent me this video clip of like a behind the scenes, or like retrospective 30 years later on the film, and they talked about filming it at night, which totally makes sense for some of these scenes that they had to do, especially the burning crossing, which is very disturbing. But still, like, what they did was they filmed all the crowd shots first around midnight, got what they needed, and then just got rid of the crowd, because that saves you money on the extras, obviously, and just shot William Shatner around 3 in the morning, just giving a speech to nobody, which is smart, because that's all you need. That's as long as you got your wide shots and your establishing shots, focus in on the speech, and it's going to seem like he's in the same place with everyone else. And that's how filmmaking works, people. And that was, old school filmmaking, independent filmmaking at its best right there. I thought that was a perfect example of that. And again, using the crowd or the townspeople to make it more authentic as the actual townspeople of the town, like that, just, it made sense. You know what I mean? So, and we've seen this before in other movies. It's obviously a cheap option to do, but also gives you that realism that a lot of big budget Hollywood movies kind of gloss over and don't even think about that. So, really appreciated that. And of course, Shatner's performance is really disturbing. I compared it to a little Minister Sinister. Like, it was very fitting. We watched X-Men 97 and Planet of the Apes before this. Like, it just, I don't know what Jerome's subconscious was going through, but he picked the right movie, because it just, all these themes were coming back to us again and again and again. And it just felt like he was a Mr. Sinister type character. And by the end of it, he ran away like a bitch, just like Mr. Sinister. So I don't know, man. Maybe these X-Men.
I mean,
writers...
he is Tucker Carlson. There is almost no difference between someone like him and someone like Tucker Carlson. This is a man who is amoral, who doesn't really have a viewpoint. Like, I don't know, is he actually racist? I don't know. He is very much playing off of what the townspeople want, but we don't actually get a sense of what he actually believes. He is just an agent of chaos. He is an agent of evil. And that is what makes him disturbing. And there's no difference between somebody like him and the demigods that you see on the Fox News, or even some of the politicians across the country. I mean, there is so little difference that it would probably surprise people to know just how well this movie has aged. And when I say how well it's aged, I'm not saying it's good for the country, but it is very clearly something that is designed to withstand the test of time and to make a far greater statement. And again, I want to point out that there are some critiques of the people who are meant to kind of be the protagonists. I mean, what is most interesting about this movie is that Adam Kramer is the lead, but he is very much the antagonist of the movie. And one of our most prominent townspeople is Tom McDaniel. He's kind of a local journalist who is not he is racist in his own right, but he has very certain limits. And just like so many other liberals in the country, is very much like, the law says that integration is going to happen, so we need to follow and observe the law. And in a lot of ways, he becomes radicalized by the response and guilted by the response of the other townspeople to believe that this is right, to the point where he is walking with the black youth to the high school, because that is the incident, so to speak, is that the high school in this town is going to be integrated, and people are very much against it. And what I find most interesting is that, when we go to the black part of the city, like even many of them are against it as well. And I like that nuance of just, the way that the way that one of the townspeople puts it, I think is really interesting. I'm not going to use the quote. I'm going to kind of paraphrase it, but basically, the idea of like them behaving like they want them to, and sort of dealing with that tension, and how things almost get too violent. Like Kramer is realizing that he no longer can control the mob, and they are going even farther than he wants to. Like he wants to go right up to the point where violence is going to happen and then step away, because that's kind of what people in his position want. They don't want the violence. They just want to incite people to do certain behaviors to get, he doesn't want integration, but he doesn't want to, kill somebody to do it necessarily. He just wants to go right up to that line. And we also see him attempting to go and date a high schooler as well. So you've got a little bit of pedophilia. And again, I want to put an emphasis on this, is that these are things that we see from a lot of right wingers even to this day. And if you don't believe me, I want you to go and Google the name Matt Gaetz, and that will tell you a lot about what you need to know about many of these individuals. Certainly not all of them, but when you look at what Matt Gaetz allegedly has done, and I use that word allegedly, it's incredibly disturbing. And this is a few weeks ago I said Conquest of the Planet of the Apes might be the most underrated movie that we have ever done, and well, I could say, like 2 weeks later, this is the most underrated movie we have ever done, I would say.
It's one of the top ones for sure. Like I think you're really high on it. I'm pretty high on it as well. I just feel like we should have had more central black characters. Like we just kind of saw them in passing, and we just kind of saw them being kind of used for both sides' agenda, so to speak, and not necessarily see their point of view. We saw some of it, but we needed a central character, and they tried to do that at the end, but it was just too late. You know what I mean? I thought they should have introduced that character way ahead of time and made him like an
the pacing of this movie is
antagonist.
very unusual, because the journalist is kind of our main protagonist, and then he gets hospitalized, and we basically never see him again. And then we focus more on sort of the black perspective, as well as Ella McDaniel, the daughter. So I think that's kind of where we go. I also want to shout out Robert Earnhardt as Vern Shipman. I mean, he is a character actor. I know I've seen him in a lot of other things. He always plays this kind of crooked businessman, corrupt politician, and he does a marvelous job. This is such a good performance in his own right.
Yeah, what a sleazeball. Those slaps at the end were pretty like, wow, I didn't see that coming, but I was just like, what a son of a bitch. But that's what that role needed. It's what it kind of needed to give you that I'm sure that's a lot of realism in those slaps too. So I don't know. It's just kind of this weird vibe. And I can't help but think, like, are these townspeople, knowing that they're in a movie, agree with what's going on in the movie? You get what I'm saying? Like, do they secretly, like, I don't know, because it just seems like they just seem too authentic, is what I'm saying, to what they were like feeling, and the crowd. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too like sensitized or desensitized. I don't know. From what I've seen in the last 5 years of what's really going on in the world in terms of these, like example, January 6th. But man, it just seemed too real to me, the way these people were reacting. So yeah, and the pedophilia stuff is just like, wow. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And then thinking of all the modern, the modern market people, and just some of those accusations, it was just nuts. So, yeah. And then, the ending is they save the kid from being lynched literally at a swing set. Jesus Christ.
I mean, they were going for the lynching. And I mean, the ending, I have to say, on the one hand, it is kind of a cop-out. But on the other hand, the town is still mostly racist. So I do have to give them credit for not doing a complete 180 and having like the big speech, and then people slow clap and they realize, oh, we love black people all along. I'm glad they didn't go in that direction, but I mean, it's an 80-minute movie, and they definitely had their limitations.
Yeah, so in this case, Bastion didn't win. Let's put it that way, because this was pretty much Bastion, like the same mentality. And you mentioned the casting of William Shatner. There's a reason to it. I think you would need for this role. You need to be like that television evangelical, that kind of charisma, right? I can imagine Shatner in his 60s, like being on a show like The Righteous Gemstones, right? Um, Even though he was too heavy, obviously he's too old to be on it now, but he would have been perfect for that kind of role. I think he's like that kind of like preacher sleazy type. You know what I mean? He would be perfect for that. And that's what this was, minus the TV part. So yeah, this was like I can imagine Shatner why he struggled for so many years for these roles, because he plays a good sci-fi hero, but he's not like a good cop hero. And like, like that other show with the TJ Hooker doesn't really work for me. I've seen some episodes, doesn't really work for me. Shatner doesn't really fit as a cop. You know what I'm saying? Like he fits more into these kind of roles. So he was actually good at Miss Congeniality for the 5 minutes that he got him in that for. So I'm going to give him credit for that too. But overall, I'm going to give this a 7.5 out of 10. I just think it needed a little more meat to the bone and a little more of that black perspective. But still, like the performance is what kind of carries the movie. And the guerrilla style shoot of the whole thing, 3 weeks on set in a real town in Missouri. You got to give credit to Roger Corman for pulling that off and kind of having that quick kind of vision, because that's what you got to do, a quick turnaround. And unfortunately, it didn't really get seen. Like we only have a budget listed here, not really any profits of any gross whatsoever. So I'm kind of curious, does it even have a gross, so to speak? Because it really didn't find any audience at all. That's not that surprising. But obviously now, especially whoever posted on YouTube, we kind of should shout them out, I guess. But man, thank you for posting on YouTube. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see all these years later, and you see all the comments on the YouTube page. Very interesting stuff about what is relevant now. So there you go.
I've been taught to not read the comments, so I did not. I do want to point out, I want to give credit to Charles Barnes as Joey Green. He plays the essentially the black boy that was about to get killed. I say boy in the pejorative sense because he was 38 years old when this movie came out, and this is one of his 3 screen credits, if you can believe it. How does that make you feel, Brian? 38 years old.
Well, I'm 30, 35 now. I guess I got 3 years to make my mark and get my 15 minutes of fame, I guess. I don't know. Maybe one day. But also shout out to Leo Gordon as Sam Griffin, the salesman that William Shatner slept with his wife. And again, just some of the dialogue is shocking. It's like, because I guess the wife is a little promiscuous, and then the guy's like, yeah, the doctors have a name for it. I don't know what it's called. I just laughed my ass off because that's so fucked up to say.
I mean, the thing about Leo Gordon is if you look at his IMDb, he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts with Grace Kelly and Anne Bancroft, and his teacher was Jason Robards. So a lot of pedigree there, that's for sure.
And his facial structure is very statuesque.
Unique.
I'll say that. Very unique, but it's like really like it makes you remember his face on screen, and it's still like a handsome kind of face too. I'm not saying it's like ugly, but it's very distinctive, almost like Jack Palance, I would say, almost like in that kind of vein. But
yeah, I get you.
Yeah, but it's really striking, and he really steps up because the first half of the movie he's kind of weak because I guess he's intimidated by the presence of the charisma of Adam Kramer. But then by the end of the movie, obviously, once he finds out that he sleeps with his wife, he's like, fuck this guy, and just tries to expose him, and he's the one that exposes him at the end. So credit to him for exposing the son of a bitch.
I love the idea that he does the right thing for the wrong reasons. Like, he does it purely to be petty. I give the movie a lot of credit for not completely copying out and selling out the characters. Like, again, the only reason he does this is because he doesn't like him. It has nothing to do with all of a sudden being a card-carrying member of the Black Panthers.
Yeah, that was. I mean, look, sometimes pettiness gets shit done. So I hate to say that, but it does get shit done.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, for sure.
So that is The Intruder. Again, this is a movie that everybody should go out of their way to watch. This is probably one of the better movies that we've had a chance to talk about in our years. Brian, we're going to go on the opposite end here. Why don't you talk about the movie that you have brought to the table?
Okay, so like I mentioned before with the filmography of Roger Corman, like 2 years ago, kind of went on the small binge of his horror movies. Like I mentioned Pit in the Pendulum, Tales of Terror, The Raven, Haunted Palace, Mask of Red Death, House of Usher, of course. They have their kind of style, right? They're all based on, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, so to speak. And these were the early '60s, so they shot them well. Once Technicolor was available, they shot these really well. But years later, all of a sudden, we get Frankenstein Unbound, and this is his last movie he's ever directed. I'm not even sure how. I mean, you get this kind of cast together. I mean, it's 20th Century Fox, so it's big budget, like it's big Hollywood production budget level. $11 million for 1990 is still a lot for a kind of period piece horror movie with sci-fi elements to it. Um, it's just shocking because John Hurt and Rula Julia were in a really highly acclaimed movie together, Kiss of the Spider Woman. I've yet to see that movie. I've heard it's great performances all around. Excuse me, not John Hurt. That's William Hurt. Excuse me. Never mind. But still, like they had like this. I mean, John Hurt is known for Alien and obviously other great movies as well. It's just Elephant Man, right? Um, but man, it just seems like they got these great actors together for I don't know, just sci-fi crap. But all I guess it's because it's Roger Corman, right? That's the draw, right? Like Roger Corman made all these careers, and it just feels like they wanted to pay tribute to him by being one of his B movies and just like hammed it up. I don't know. It's
I
one of the
mean, is this
most
a B movie?
craziest.
This movie had a budget of $11.5 million. He got paid $1 million to do this. So while this may not be an A movie, I don't know that like does not necessarily fall into the traditional B movie oeuvre that I think Roger Corman is known for.
So it's just a straight up A failure. Is that what you're saying? Because it just feels like it's a B
I
level
mean, it feels like
movie.
it's somewhere in between. It feels like it's not quite an A movie. It feels like it's not quite a B movie. And that might be the problem. Like fundamentally, this movie is trying to do something that is above the typical, I guess some people would say schlock that Corman put out. But what we ended up with was something that ultimately did not know what it wanted to be. Like it is very clearly influenced by Back to the Future with the car that John Hurt draws. There's references to a tower. There's literal time travel that's going on. So clearly, it's being influenced by Back to the Future, but it doesn't have it doesn't really stand by its convictions because this is an all-time bad script. This script is so bad. It is just the dialogue is barely listenable. It's worth pointing out Raul Julia at this point, like in the same year that this movie came out, he also did Presumed Innocent, which is like an awards-worthy movie, and it's just like you could not contrast Raul Julia's career more distinctly than these two movies, and this doesn't work. Like ultimately, like this is a movie that fundamentally does not work. But I will let you go on and describe more of what the movie is actually about. Because you are the one that has to make sense of this.
Yeah, because the reason I picked this is because I've been hearing on other, YouTube channels about how ridiculous this movie is and how you should go out of the way to see it. And this seemed like the perfect opportunity because there's the death of Roger Corman. It's his last film. And we just, we reviewed Presumed Innocent last year with Rolo Julia, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity. And it's just crazy how this plot is because the thing is like it's not an original script. It's based on a book. And my thinking is, who picked this book out thinking that this would be like a good Hollywood script? Because this would make sense for like a Cannon movie in like 1984, right? But by this point, Cannon's pretty much done. And this is like, again, like I said, 20th Century Fox, big budget production. So basically the plot is William Hurt is in the future, creates a weapon that opens up time portals, goes back in time to the Victorian era, I guess, or whatever, and finds Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, meaning that Dr. Frankenstein is a real person in that reality. And not only that, he also finds Mary Shelley, meaning that Mary Shelley and Frankenstein and the monster were all part of the same universe instead of like creating a fictional universe based on Mary Shelley's actual reality. I know this sounds
Can I
It's
point out
wild.
that Bridget Fonda plays Mary Shelley? 1990, Bridget Fonda is in this movie, coming out the same year as. Do you remember what other prominent movie Bridget Fonda was in 1990?
Was it La Femme Nikita?
The Godfather Part 3.
Oh my God, I forgot she's in that too. Yeah, so it's just the premise is wild. I get it, but what's even crazier is that like they just didn't give a shit about like time travel rules or like continuity. Like we still see the roads like paved. Like there were no paved roads in like 1815 or whatever. And they just were like, fuck it. We have a car. And then not only that, he shows the car to people. He shows the car to Dr. Frankenstein. And it's a and it's a futuristic car. And it's like it's talking and it's got like AI or whatever. And like he's talking to the car and he goes, Mary Shelley, give me a reference. Oh yes, the book, Frankenstein. Give me a print copy. And in 2 seconds, this print copy on like computer paper comes out of the car and he's got a copy of the book. So I don't know, man. It's just wild, like totally wild. And not only that, we see the monster, which is cool. Like that's one of the cooler Frankenstein monsters I have seen because they emphasize the strength part of the fact that he can just rip people's limbs off and shit like that. So that was cool.
The design of the creature is actually one of the best parts of the movie. Like I actually like the fact that it doesn't resemble past Frankenstein's and that it goes in a very different direction. But again, once you get past the great design, there's nothing there.
Okay, this has been the kicker for me because you mentioned Bridget Fonda. Okay, so they're in Switzerland, right? Bridget Fonda's accent is some cross between American and English that falls somewhere in the middle. And then Raul Julia, God bless him, he's Puerto Rican, right? Hypothetically, let's just say for the movie's sake that he's Spanish from Spain, right? So let's say he's got a Spanish accent in Switzerland, and he's supposed to be French or something. Like they just threw all that out the window. And then John Hurt comes in wearing contemporary clothes, and everyone's kind of like staring at him, but just kind of giving a pass. And then he starts showing people his car. Oh man, this is some wild shit. And then we get to the part where it's like, oh, we're actually in the middle of the Frankenstein novel. Like they just dropped him in the middle because there's this one scene. I don't know if you're familiar with the novel, but that trial of that girl for suspecting to kill Frankenstein's brother, that's a part of the book, and that's like halfway through. So it's like they didn't even bother like, hey, we're going to shoot you off in the beginning of the story. We're going to drop you off in the middle. And not only that, depending on, which version of the Frankenstein interpretation you go with, like it kind of leads into Bride of Frankenstein at the end. But they just kind of shoehorned in the Bride of Frankenstein stuff at the end too. So I was like, oh my God. And not only that, so X-Men 97, right? They all just kind of disappeared in the time stream, right? I guess the same thing happens here. Like the car explodes with a bunch of energy, and like Frankenstein, the monster, Bride of Frankenstein, all transport to a different timeline or something in snow. Oh my God! And then the monster dies after Raul Julia dies as well, and it's all kinds of chaos. It's ridiculous, and that's pretty much the plot of the movie. And not only that, John Hurt sleeps with Mary Shelley and just breaks the time continuum altogether. I don't know what's going on, and they don't even fix the time continuum problem because there's a giant hole in the clouds.
Has a lot of plot, and it's like 3 minutes longer than The Intruder, and what you described happened in the same amount of time as The Intruder. And The Intruder very much feels like they very much escalate things. Like the movie is an hour and 20 minutes, but they escalate things at such a good pace. And this movie is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous in a way that you can't appreciate because nobody in the movie is acknowledging how ridiculous everything is. Like you really needed. I like John Hurt. I like Raul Julia. I like Bridget Fonda. They're playing this straight, and you need to not play this straight. You need a kind of ridiculousness that these three actors are just not willing to put forth. And I don't know how you do it. Like, do you cast like Christopher Lloyd for the winks at the audience? Like, do you do something like that, or do you just make this more of a comedy? I think if you make this more of a comedy, I think the ridiculousness is just a lot better because going into this movie, I thought there was going to be more humor because I looked at the premise. I'm like, okay, this is so ridiculous that they have to take a very different and unique approach to this. But for my money, this is a movie that just doesn't work on a fundamental level. It's trying to do too much. It's trying to be like this weird Back to the Future homage, while also like incorporating elements of horror and the old school Frankenstein lore. Yeah, this movie is just it's sad. It's depressing to me that this is kind of his last directorial film because as we know, he has had such an influence on so many careers, and to know like this was his last directed feature, I mean, this is kind of embarrassing at times.
But you watch this and you think, you know what? Now I kind of see why Rule Julia ended up doing Street Fighter. You know what I mean? It's, I guess.
I mean, it's certainly you could.
It seems like if he's willing to do something like this, then he's willing to do Street Fighter for his kids. So I get it. Like, he's willing to drop his level down a bit. And it's also interesting that if you click on Rule Julia's like wiki, his first image that pops up is him playing Dracula on stage. So that was kind of cool. Like, he's played Dracula and he's played Dr. Frankenstein, and clearly he's a better Dracula. Like, you get you give him a nice shave, right? If you shave Rule Julia when he was like in his 30s, he still looked like he was in his early 20s, man. So that would have been great if they were able to get that on screen. I don't know if there's a screen version of that, but it says here stage version. But man, that's a great casting for him as Dracula. Just putting that out there for back in the day. If anyone's got footage of that, I'm gonna find it because that sounds interesting. But yeah, this script is just out of its goddamn mind, and it had no right for grossing any money at all. And it grossed $300,000, equivalent to about $1 million today. And with the $11.5 million budget, Jesus Christ, what a waste of money this was, man. And not only that, like, you had Jason Patrick in this movie in the background, like, good God, because he had a starring role in Lost Boys 3 years prior. I don't know, man, just ridiculous.
Choices were definitely made in this here movie. I mean, I'm giving this probably like a 4 out of 10, and that feels incredibly generous. I just don't think that this is a movie that is worthy of somebody who is as legendary as Roger Corman. And I think part of the challenge with Corman is that, yes, he is a director. He has a lot of movies that he is credited for, but a lot of the work that he did was as a producer, and I think it's much harder to look at a Corman produced movie and come to some conclusions. Like, I'm glad we went through this exercise, but I think to really pay tribute, you really just almost have to like list all of the people that he influenced as a producer. Like that.
Yeah,
ultimately,
I got the quick list right here. If you want to kind of go through it quick, like he's listed as producer only.
Yeah.
But the guys that he's broken in or helped break in, it's like Peter Bogdanovich, right? Martin Scorsese, Jonathan Demme, Joe Dante, right? Just to name a few. And some of I guess the more recent one he did was Timur, I can't pronounce his name, Bekmambetov or something. He did those like Russian vampire movies years ago, but he kind of made a name for himself a little bit. But if you've heard of those connoisseur movies back in the 90s on straight to video, he was a producer on that as well. And if you want to say that Carnosaur is a Jurassic Park ripoff, you can. But technically, Carnosaur 1 came out before Jurassic Park 1. So that's a whole other straight-to-video 90s debate you can have on that one. But, yeah, just so many names he's helped produce. And then, of course, I mentioned that story with Jack Nicholson, how he helped Jack Nicholson break into the industry and how he owes his career to Roger Corman and all that thing. So also Ron Howard, you mentioned the Grand Theft Auto thing. That's directed by Ron Howard, and that's Ron Howard's first directorial debut film. So just all over the place, this guy's given a lot of opportunities to a lot of people. And that's kind of what it's all about. You know what I'm saying? I guess he knew his limitations in terms of being a director and just dipped his toe into the producer pool for a bit. And, like some of these movies, obviously some stuff like The Arena, right? Battle Beyond the Stars, not exactly classics. I've seen clips of Battle Beyond the Stars. It's really questionable. It's very much a Star Wars ripoff, but still like a movie like Death Race 2000 that he produced was like obviously remade in a Death Race in what was that 2008 with Jason Statham. So he's got an influence, man. Like whether or not we realize it or not. And shout out to Rock and Roll High School because he produced that one, but that's kind of known for, if you're a fan of the band the Ramones, they're all in that movie. So there's a lot of like star power that he's influenced over the years. So credit to Roger Corman for being who he is and stuck to his guns. Obviously, all these years later, I mean, he's got producing credits up until 2018. It looks like with that Death Race stuff. So yeah, that Death Race remake was 2008, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Perfect. That's a perfect director for a Roger Corman produced movie. I'll say that for sure.
For sure. That is our discussion of Roger Corman. It is by no means comprehensive. We could spend hours and hours, and maybe we'll come back to it at some point, but we are going to march on here with the Not Content podcast. We have some great summer plans that we are going to be talking about next week. But Brian, since it is the last Tuesday of the month and throughout baseball season, we are going to be doing a number of baseball movies. We honored the 35th anniversary of Major League. And from what I understand, we are honoring the 35th anniversary of another movie next week.
Field of Dreams. So I was kind of off on my calculations when I looked at the dates. They actually came out a month apart, not 2 weeks apart. But still, like the fact that it was a month apart meant you can watch Field of Dreams and Major League in the same cinematic complex in June of 1989. Still says a lot. But yeah, Field of Dreams, highly, I mean, it's somewhat parodied a little bit. If you build it, they will come. Like we've heard that so many in different variations. And we kind of mentioned it when we talked about 8 Men Out. But yeah, this movie gets you really like emotional, like in terms of like the father-son stuff, obviously. But when they brought back the Field of Dreams, or they brought in the Field of Dreams game, the annual game now the MLB has every June in the actual Field of Dreams field, it's great because they bring back Kevin Costner for some stuff, and then yeah, we could talk about it next week with Ken Griffey Jr. coming out with his dad. Oh my God, that pulls my heartstrings, and then playing catch.
Tim Anderson hitting the game-winning home run into the corn, a fantastic moment that unfortunately the White Sox will never reach again, apparently.
But that was their playoffs that year. That was their playoffs that year because they went to the playoffs that year.
Anderson hitting that home run was pretty incredible. I mean, that whole night, just watching everything. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful moment.
For sure, and we'll talk about that for sure again next week because I felt like, well, I've brought this up, but I think they should do more than one game a year. But everyone tells me that ruins it. I get it, but we can talk about that next week.
I would say it is. Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe 2 more? Is it too much? Because I feel like it's such a.
I don't mind the idea of doing different games in different places. Like I like the fact that they do the Little League World Series. Like they go to Williamsport and play a game. Like I like the idea of going to smaller venues and playing games, but I think doing more than one Field of Dreams game would be kind of ridiculous. I just don't think
my pitch would be a playoff game, but I don't even know how can you do that. I don't know how political the owners would get on that one, but still.
I can't even imagine. I mean, they just wouldn't. They just wouldn't do it. But yeah, next week we will be talking about Field of Dreams among so many other things that we will again be doing for the rest of the summer as we will be celebrating different anniversaries. 2024, quite a year for anniversaries when you look at movies that came out in 1994. 1999, some later, some earlier. We have plans. We'll talk more about them next week. For Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week.